It's Dynasty season, and today we're talking quarterbacks. Who do you buy? Who should you sell? Where do the rookies land? And where should you draft them in your Dynasty startups? Stick around to find out on the Rasball NFL YouTube channel. I'm Ben Wosley. Welcome to the Rasball YouTube channel. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe. You can find my full Dynasty rankings at football.rasball.com. You can also go to my personal website, ffdfantasyfootball.com, if you're looking for rookie rankings and any of the other articles and things like that I do as well. Make sure you also check out the YouTube channel for the other content here. And I've got some longer form stuff on my YouTube channel at the Fantasy First Down. Now, today we're talking Dynasty quarterbacks. We're going to run through my top 20 rankings. I'm going to talk about how I rank them, when you should be looking for these players, when should you buy them, when should you sell them, and what sort of value do they have long term. Let's king into it. I've got Josh Allen number one, and he's not my number one in all formats. We're talking about 4-point passing touchdown leagues. That means if you're in a 6-point league, you probably want to be valuing guys who are going to have a lot more passing touchdowns higher. You've also got to remember someone like Allen is going to have a lot more interceptions, so his value drops in those leagues as well. I would be taking him in startup leagues in the first round because we know that quarterbacks are going to have a longer shelf life. They're very valuable. Now, if you're in a particularly small league, like a 10-team or a 12-team, that does drop the value a little bit. And if you're in a super flex league, you should be getting quarterbacks with probably the first 8, 9, 10 picks. There's so much value in having a good quarterback when you're starting two of them, and Allen's the best of those. I would be going out of my way to get Allen if I'm challenging for a title right now, because he's the kind of guy that could put you over the edge. If you don't have one of these top quarterbacks, it's a lot harder to win titles because they put up so many points. So Allen comes in first. He's been so consistent, top 2 finishes the last 4 seasons. I'm expecting a lot more of that. He's shown that he can stay healthy for the long term. He's going to have a good shelf life because he's still only 28, so he's number one off the board for me. Coming in close behind him is Patrick Mahomes. He had a bit of a down season last season, but I'm expecting him to bounce back. They've given him more weapons, and you do have to be a little bit concerned about what's going to happen when he doesn't have Travis Kelce down the road. But you've got to feel like they're going to keep giving him the right weapons. They want him to pass the ball. They've given him a long-term contract. He is the face of this franchise, and they're very good. The combination of him and Andy Reid is going to continue to win a lot of titles. That means he goes off the board very early. You would not get an argument from me if you decided to take him first overall in your Superflex league and well into the first round in your Dynasty startup. He's going to have value for the long term. Again, only 28 years old, so he's someone that I want to be taking early as well. There's an argument that you could take Jalen Hurts early as well, but I'm concerned about the way Hurts plays. He's going to be good for the next 5 or so seasons, but we've seen with rushing quarterbacks that they do tend to fall off a lot faster because his primary value doesn't come with his arms, it comes with his legs. That's not going to last. It's the same deal with Lamar Jackson. So he's very good in the short term, and arguably if you're trying to win at this very moment, you could reasonably take him first overall, or at least trade for him over pretty much anyone else. But in the long term, he's going to fall off within the next 5 years or so. I'm not saying he's going to be totally useless, but he's not going to give you that rushing production that he is at the moment. For that reason, hold on to him now, make good use of him, but at some point, you're going to want to sell him before the drop-off happens. Now, Joe Burrow is a little bit high in my rankings for me. I don't like having him this high, but he's going to have good longevity and he's really talented. They just haven't worked out how to use him. Their scoring rate was super low last season. I don't really know that Zach Taylor continuing to call the plays is particularly working, but even though they've got a new OC in, they still seem to be saying that it's going to be Taylor doing it. So that hasn't been working particularly well in the past. They had a very high pass percentage, second highest in the league, but Burrow still wasn't able to be productive with it. He does have 2 top 5 finishes, and he was injured at times last season. So hopefully if he can get healthy, he can get things going. He's got a lot of talented receivers in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, at least for now. They brought in Jermaine Burton, which I think is a good option, assuming his character issues don't become an issue. So there's plenty of talent there. The question is, can he produce consistently? He doesn't have that same rushing floor as a lot of these guys, but he's got so much arm talent that you have to feel that he's going to be good for your team in the long term. That's why I've got him this high. If you decided to take someone like a Lamar Jackson over him, I wouldn't argue about that. And I think there are even arguments to take the rookies, to take a CJ Stroud, to take an Anthony Richardson, because those guys have such good upside. They've just got a whole lot more risk. I think with Burrow, you know what you're going to get. They're going to pass the ball a lot. They got rid of Joe Mixon. They got in weaker running backs, so you're going to get a strong passing game. The question is Burrow going to be able to produce enough for fantasy? In a 4-point touchdown league for passing touchdowns, it's a little bit risky. In a 6-point league, I definitely like him a lot higher because of that. Now, Lamar Jackson's in at number 5. In my redraft rankings, he's a lot earlier, but I do feel like the fall-off's going to happen for him in the next 3 to 4 years. He's so reliant on his legs. When they tried to get him to pass more, it just didn't work because he's not actually that good a passing quarterback. He's fine, but by NFL standards, he's not elite. So once he doesn't have his legs anymore, and that's going to happen at some point in time, he's going to fall off a cliff. And that means you're going to want to sell him before that happens. You might not know when that's going to happen. He could just turn up one game and get injured, and all of a sudden he's got no more value at all. So you've got to understand that you're being a little bit risky by holding on to Lamar Jackson. I know a lot of people are trying to sell him cheap right now. I wouldn't do that. But if I'm doing a full rebuild, I would be trying to get full value for him as I sell him. I'd want another strong quarterback. Maybe one of the rookies this year would be a viable option as an alternative to trade for him. If you can get one of those guys, then you can probably move on from Jackson and have a guy who's going to be a little bit more reliable for the long term. Having said that, you're trying to win now. Jackson's a good guy to get. In startups, he's still going in the first round in most situations, but you're kind of locked into a win now strategy if you do that. If you're in an existing league and you're looking to win your league, you can probably get Jackson a little bit cheaper because some people are going to be thinking now's the time to sell for that reason. Now, this is very early for Caleb Williams. I acknowledge that. A lot of people are calling him a bust candidate. I don't see it at all. He's one of the best prospects we've seen out of college in a long, long time. If you go and look at my QB hit rate article on football.rasball.com, and you should, you're going to see just how successful top 3 NFL draft picks are when they're quarterbacks. I know we see guys like Trey Lance and we go, oh no, early quarterbacks often bust. That's absolutely not the case. There have been very few top 3 draft picks that have been quarterbacks that have busted in recent years. I think we're going to find that Williams is a reliable quarterback for the long term. He's in an excellent situation. He's got good pass catches to pass to. I think we're going to see he has a lot of success. He could easily outdo this value and turn out to be a top 3 or 4 quarterback for a long time. He's got legs, but he's got a good passing game as well. They're going to want to pass the ball with him, and they're going to be aggressive. I think they're going to be a high-scoring team because they've got so many offensive weapons there. And frankly, I think they're going to need to. Their defense isn't perfect, but I think they're going to be competing for at least the playoffs this year. And I think for that reason, you're going to see Williams, even if he's not great this year, he's going to be great long-term. And you've got to get in now just in case he does have a really good rookie season. If he has a bad rookie season, then I'll be talking about him as a buy low candidate for sure. Now, CJ Stroud is a guy who had a fantastic season last season. Didn't really translate to fantasy football. 13th overall finish, but for a rookie, he was fantastic. You'd expect he does step up this season. The problem is, doesn't have a fantastic rushing floor, and that means really relying on his arm. We saw with guys like Tom Brady, who are very good pocket passers, that they are good for fantasy when they're having a good season, but if things aren't quite going right for them, they are going to offer you less value because they don't have that floor, and that's the risk with Stroud. They've done a good job of putting a lot of good receivers around him, bringing in Stephon Diggs to make sure that they've at least got good, healthy receivers is a good thing. Nico Collins and Tank Dell looked good last year as well, so I feel like he's got the pass catches. They've got Dalton Schultz coming back as well. The question is, can those guys stay healthy? Can he produce again at that level, or are NFL teams going to start working him out? That's where the risk comes in, and that's why he's a little bit lower than some guys. I've seen him go pretty early in drafts. I did a mock draft with the guys from CBS Sports, and he went in the top 5, which seemed crazy to me. It was a super flex draft, but it still seemed crazy to me. I think he's a little bit lower than that, except maybe in a 6-point passing touchdown league, you can push him a little bit higher towards maybe past Williams, arguably past Lamar Jackson in that sort of Joe Burrow range. Now, Anthony Richardson's another risky guy. We didn't know what to expect from him coming out of college because he didn't play much in college. He only played 10 or 11 college games. But he did look pretty darn good when he was playing in the NFL. It's only a small sample size, and he does have inconsistency with his accuracy, but his legs are so good that they give him that floor that we're looking for in fantasy. Is he going to last in the NFL for a long time? Probably not, but he's at least going to have a good time while he's there, and that makes him valuable for fantasy. So I would be picking him probably late first round in a Dynasty Superflex startup, and in any other Dynasty league, kind of third round region, I think, is reasonable for Richardson. You're probably going to be able to get him there pretty easily. I am pretty high on quarterbacks in Dynasty because there's a lot of guys here who offer a lot of value. If you're getting Richardson, you kind of want to be aiming to win now because he's not a future quarterback, even though he's young. We're talking about a guy who's only going to have a limited lifespan, like your Lamar Jackson, like to an extent Jalen Hurts. For that reason, you want to strike while the iron's hot. Now, another guy in that exact same category is Jaden Daniels, in that he's got a really good rushing floor. The difference with Daniels is he's very accurate on the long ball. If anything, he's a little bit overly cautious, and that might be a little bit restrictive for him. He's got 3 good pass catches to pass to. Well, he's got 2 good pass catches to cast to. I don't really know what to make of Luke McCaffrey at the moment, but I think Jahan Dotson's a little bit underrated. I think he's going to bounce back a bit this season. And Terry McLaurin is a good wide receiver. So he does have those guys there. But most importantly, when that breaks down, he's not going to check down. He's going to use his legs, and that makes him fantastic for fantasy. So I really like Jaden Daniels. He's someone that you can get cheap. I've seen him go as late as the 9th and 10th picks in rookie drafts, even in non-super flex leagues. For that reason, I think he's someone that you should be going out of your way to try to get. And you might even be able to buy him off the guy who drafted him who might not love him. He's going as late as the very end of the first round. That's very valuable. We're talking about a guy who could be one of the elite quarterbacks for the distant future. For that reason, I'm going out of my way to get Jaden Daniels when I can. There is risk. The risk is, well, firstly, he's pretty slight. And for that reason, he has some injury risk with him. We saw that with Anthony Richardson, though I think that was more of a freak injury. With Daniels, we're talking about a guy who may not be able to hold up to the rigors in the NFL. I don't know if there's really established law around that, but I think there's at least some risk there. We also just legitimately haven't seen him play, and that adds to some risk. But I personally think he's going to be fantastic, and that rushing floor is so valuable. Dak Prescott is someone I like a lot this year. I've had another top 5 season. Even without fantastic passing options, when your wide receiver 2 is Brandon Cooks, your wide receiver 3 is Jalen Tolbert, I guess. Realistically, you're doing pretty well to have a good finish like this. And I think you'll probably have another one because they have been leaning on the run a lot. I don't think they're going to be able to keep doing that. They have to pass the ball. They go to CD Lamb a lot, but it works. It's going to be a lot of CD Lamb, a lot of Jake Ferguson, a little bit of Brandon Cooks and whoever else, and some checkdowns to whoever the running backs happen to be, Zeke, Rico Dowdle, whoever else. That's going to be valuable. He's also still got that rushing floor, but that is going to fade after a while. He is 30 years old right now, and that rushing floor disappearing is the reason I'm concerned about him. We've also seen him have a lot of injuries, and we've seen that when he hasn't been rushed effectively and hasn't had the team around him, when the team's not playing well, he does tend to struggle for fantasy, and that lowers his value a little bit. That's why he's down here at the end of my top 10. Now, I've also got Kyler Murray quite low. This is a couple of things. Firstly, pretty injury prone. He's pretty small and he does get injured. He likes to run a lot, but I think they're going to try to stop him from running quite as much so he stops getting injured. That's terrible news for fantasy. I'm also a little bit concerned that at some point they might just decide they need to move on for him. They haven't really been able to make it work. He was very good back in 2020, but since then he hasn't been healthy, and when he has, he's been inconsistent. So they're bringing in good weapons around him. They've got Marvin Harrison Jr. We've seen Trey McBride be very good, but he needs to have a good season in the next year or two, or he might be out the door. That's where the risk is. If you believe that he's good enough to keep his job, then he should be a lot higher than this because he's still only 26 years old and he's very talented. I'm just concerned that the talent might not quite be enough to keep him in a reliable job with a good team that's going to make him good for fantasy. Trevor Lawrence is another guy who just hasn't been consistently good, but it's not been a health issue. It's just been a Trevor Lawrence issue. He's got such good pass catches and he's just not been able to make it work. We thought he was better than this and he just hasn't been. It's been very disappointing. Now, to be fair, they do run the ball a lot. They did have Etienne be the number 2 running back last season, and they mixed it up and put a lot of other guys in there as well. So that's a little bit of an issue. I think they probably get a little bit pass heavier in the future at some point in time, but they need to give him slightly better weapons. They've got Brian Thomas Jr., who's very boom bust. If he booms, that could be really good for Trevor Lawrence, which is why I'm still happy to have him up here. I think because he's very young, because he's still got development time, he's someone that you can rely on in the NFL for at least the next few years, but he doesn't have that assured long-term outlook that some of the top guys do. Plus, he hasn't had those really elite fantasy finishes to kind of hang your hat on. Jordan Love had a fantastic year last year. I don't know how much it's going to continue. They kind of got surprising surprising benefits out of some pretty average wide receiver play. They weren't even using their number one receiver, Reed, as much as they possibly could have been. He was only out there for 60% of the snaps. It was a whole lot of Romeo Dobbs who looked okay. Christian Watson hasn't been able to keep healthy. A lot of Dontavian Wicks. These aren't guys that we think of as being elite wide receiver. And Jordan Love just made it work. Now, to be fair, it's a very good system that relies on the run. It's going to be a little bit harder for them to do that without Aaron Jones, but I think Josh Jacobs should do it okay. Is he able to get the same production as last season? No, I really don't think so. I think realistically, if he stays healthy, he's a top 10 quarterback, but I think it's unlikely he's top 5 again. Having said that, he might prove me wrong. He just doesn't have that same rushing floor that a lot of the other top guys do that can make you feel safe about them. I do think he's going to be good in this league for a while, but I don't think we've seen quite enough of him yet to really say that assuredly. There are plenty of quarterbacks out there who've had 1 or 2 good years and then fallen off after that. It's entirely possible that Jordan Love falls into that category. That risk is why I've got him lower. I would be taking him in super flex leagues, kind of late second round into the third round. I think he's one of those guys that you can wait a little bit for. There's a whole heap of guys in this same category, and I think you can just wait to see who falls to you. In a normal non-super flex league, in a dynasty startup, he's somebody that I want to let other people take. I think people are overvaluing him a little bit. If I've got him, if anything, I'm probably trying to sell high. Now, Tua Tagovailoa, very talented, very good passing offense last season. They pass the ball very effectively, but they keep running it with it when they're in the red zone. That's really hurting his production. He finished top 10, but they had the second most passing yard percentage. So it's a little bit weird the way they're doing things. They're kind of passing to get the ball down the field, but then they're using a whole lot of Raheem Mostert in the red zone. Is that going to continue? I think probably. I think we're going to see a lot more of the run game in the red zone because it's so effective. They will continue to pass plenty, but that lack of touchdown production does hurt him. The biggest issue for Tua, though, is not the talent, because I think he's very talented. I like him a lot from a talent perspective. My biggest issue with him is whether he can stay healthy. We've seen a lot of concussion issues. It didn't happen last season, but it's always a risk. It's one knock and he could be out for the rest of his career. And that's enough for me to ease back a little bit on Tua and take him a little bit later on. Now, Justin Herbert is another guy I've eased back on a lot. He's been disappointing the last couple of seasons. Did have some injury risk issues last season, but the biggest issue for me is, firstly, not the same pass catchers. We don't have Keenan Allen there anymore. We don't have Mike Williams, and the guys who replaced him just aren't as talented. Secondly, they're going to run the ball a lot. Okay, this hub house system they're putting in, bringing in an OC from Baltimore, bringing in 2 running backs from Baltimore. What do you think is going to happen here? They're going to run the ball a heap. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to pass it at all. He is still arguably their best player. I just don't think he has the weapons to be able to pass the ball as much as he needs to be productive. I'm nervous about him. If anything, I'm selling high on him if I can find someone who is willing to think that he's good enough to buy high on. It's up to you what you do with that information. I think that you could arguably put him as high as 12th, but I think there's a lot of risk there. And I think in the near future, you might find that he's a little bit disappointing for fantasy, but there's certainly at least some more upside there than most of the guys below this. Brock Purdy, I find it really hard to place. 6th overall last year. I think that's just because the offense was elite. That's not going to remain the case for the long term. They're going to have to lose some players, whether it's Debo, whether it's Ayuk. I mean, Chris McCaffrey's not going to last forever. George Kittle's not going to last forever. These guys are all aging out. This is dynasty. Purdy might be good for a year or 2, but it's not because of him. It's because of the guys around him. And for that reason, you can't rely on him being good for the long term. So with Purdy, I'm selling high if I can. I'm taking him cheap if he's available cheap, because I know he'll be good for a season or 2, but I'm certainly not going out of my way to get him. A guy that I really do like, and if I can't get Jaden Daniels to get in this guy, is Drake May. The problem with Drake May, we don't know if he's starting this year, and if he is, the players around him are pretty weak. Jalen Polk's his number 1 receiver. We don't know how good he's going to be. Kendrick Bourne is average. He has some good games, but realistically, he's an undrafted free agent who's just come good. They've got Demario Douglas, who's man. They've got a whole lot of other randoms behind that. I think KJ Osborne, Javon Baker's come in. I'm not interested in him at all either. It's just a whole heap of guys. For that reason, not particularly interested in Drake May in the near future, but long-term, I think he could be fantastic. We're talking about Josh Allen upside, a guy that can run the ball, a guy with a big, accurate arm. He's someone that I think is going to be good in the NFL for a long time, but he's going to take a little bit of development. Whether he starts year one, I don't know. Personally, I hope he doesn't. I think it would be better for his development if he spends a year learning with a clipboard behind Jacoby Brissett, who can lose with this offense just fine. They rebuild, they get in some good players around him next year, then they take off next year and become good. I'm hoping that's what happens. If it is, then he's going to be great for Dynasty long term. The problem is short term, he's not someone you can use at all. Someone that you could definitely use right now, but I wouldn't want to rely on, is Jared Goff. This is the kind of guy that I think is more of like a solid super flex quarterback. He's healthy most of the time. They want to run the ball heavily, but they pass it enough and they have a good enough offense and they play enough plays and they need to chase games enough that he is going to pass it enough to be reliable. Top 10 the last 2 seasons, which is, I think, surprising, but he is able to stay healthy. He just got re-signed to a solid contract. So I think that at least for the next few years, you're going to get solid production out of him, but he's not a league winner. I think he's the kind of guy that you can bring in there in Superflex and be your second or third quarterback and be absolutely fine. You can probably get him cheap. For that reason, I'm interested in him only in those situations. If you're in a 1 QB league, you better hope he's your backup, because if he's your starter, you're not winning your league outside very deep leagues. 19th to Sean Watson, so much risk here. He hasn't been good for years. It's been 2020 was his last solid season. Didn't look great last season when playing. Didn't look particularly good the season before when playing. So we need to see something from him before we really rely on him. He's just 28 years old, same age as Josh Allen, same age as Patrick Mahomes, but gosh, he's got some tread on the tires and not the good type. It is entirely possible he'll be out of the league at some stage if he keeps doing stupid stuff. It's also entirely possible that he can find his way back to that potential that he had earlier. So if he can do that, he's going to be good. He can still run a little bit. He's an accurate, aggressive passer when he wants to be, but we need to see him actually do it. For that reason, he's ranked down here at the moment, but there's a lot of upside and a lot more upside than a lot of guys in this range. So if you're looking for upside, if this is a bench guy you're just taking a shot on, I do like Deshaun Watson. And last but not least, I've got JJ McCarthy in here, and I don't feel great about it. I think there's certainly an argument that he's not even the next rookie you take, but he is a guy who's going to start now, and that has some value. I do think that he's probably the starter week 1, or if he's not, it's not going to take long before they move on from Sam Darnold. This is a guy they're thinking long-term, but it does concern me a little bit the way they look at him. I know they took him 10th overall, which comes with a lot more risk than a top 3 pick, but they didn't really need to trade up a lot for him. They traded up 1 spot, which is a bit funky in the first place, but it didn't cost them very much. They weren't willing to pay that much. Now, it's firstly very smart drafting, but it also says something about the way they value McCarthy. They like him enough. Now, he has a lot of good weapons. Justin Jefferson just got signed to a massive new contract, and a deserved one, and I think that's smart to do that while they've got a guy on a rookie quarterback contract. They've also got Jordan Addison, who's young and talented. TJ Hockenson will hopefully be back halfway through the season. So they've got some players there. Aaron Jones is a good pass-catching running back. So there's definitely some weapons. Can McCarthy make the most of it? I don't know. I don't think we've seen enough of it yet to really say that he can. For that reason, if you're doing a rebuild, I'm not taking McCarthy in this situation. I'm probably waiting a little bit and then taking Michael Penix, who I think has a lot more upside, more talented players around him. And when he's eventually starting, he's going to be more useful for you. JJ McCarthy is kind of in that middle range where I think he can be good for a while, but he's not going to be excellent. If you win now, you're probably going to want to take a veteran. You might even want to take an Aaron Rodgers or something who can help you win for a year or two. But if you're thinking long-term, you're probably thinking Michael Penix. So there's real mid-range where you've got to kind of be thinking, I want to be solid now, but I definitely also want to think about the future. In that case, JJ McCarthy's your guy. And that's the top 20. Hope you've enjoyed me breaking down my QB rankings. I'll be back to do the other positions very soon. If you haven't already, make sure you head over to football.rasball.com. Heaps of articles over there. You can also check out my website, ffdfantasyfootball.com. You can find me on Instagram at @thefantasyfirstdown and on X at @fantasyfirstdown with no O. And if you're not already, you got to be following all the Rasball stuff on there as well. It's Rasball Fantasy on Instagram and Rasball NFL on X. You can also find my stuff on YouTube at The Fantasy First Down. If you want a lot longer stuff, my videos normally go about twice as long. So make sure you hit up that stuff if you're interested. I'm looking forward to catching up with you guys soon for another Dynasty video.